All right, well, welcome everybody. Heather, I'm glad you're here. If you're having trouble hearing Heather, of course, you can just increase your speaker volume on your individual computer. We've got the slides themselves you can download and follow along if you would like. So Heather, go ahead.
Okay, so welcome to Survey Accessibility. I apologize for the delay this morning. I had some technical difficulties here, but let's jump in and get started. A little bit about the Office of Research. We do several of these workshops every year. We've done a couple of these Qualtrics sessions. We've got some other workshops as well. You can find those at the link on the screen. We will make these slides available to you, so don't feel like you have to hurry and jot all this down. But all the archives and all the recordings of these sessions can be found there. Although I am the Qualtrics, one of the Qualtrics division admins for EHE, I would prefer that you go to Qualtrics.com for a solution to your issues before you come to see me. But if you have something and you're really stuck, feel free to reach out to me, and I will do my best to get you up and going. So let's talk accessibility. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the minimum digital accessibility standards that OSU has put out as policy. We're going to learn how to check your survey for accessibility. We're going to talk about inaccessible question types and the recommended alternatives, and some best practices for designing an accessible survey. So this is just a blurb from the LSU policy. Basically, the long and the short of it is, it sounds like one individual filed several lawsuits with universities about the content that they made, the public content that they had available on their websites not being accessible to screen readers or not complying with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So as such, this is a partial response to that. The prior policy was just kind of a reasonable and prudent kind of thing, and they've really gone further to spell that out now, what the responsibilities that we have as digital content providers, what we have to do for that. So there's a little blurb of that. I will send you the actual policy itself and some other accessibility links after the session.
Heather,
one thing I should say here.
I was going to say, Heather, that last sentence on this slide seems to be quite interesting.
Yep, that was the one I was just going to get to. So if you are using Qualtrics in a course that you are teaching, you really, the understanding that I have is you really can't require that for credit because Qualtrics itself, using Qualtrics, is not yet an accessible format. So as a survey designer, it's not accessible on the designer end. Qualtrics is working on that. As soon as we have resolution on that, we will get that information out to everybody. But what makes it difficult is the standard is you have to, if you assign a Qualtrics survey as part of your course, you have to also offer an equal and I forget what the terminology is, but basically it has to be the exact same thing offered in an accessible format with the same ease of use as Qualtrics, which is a little bit difficult, I think, to meet that standard at this point. So I would be a little cautious about assigning Qualtrics for credit as part of your course. You could make it be an optional thing, or but it's a little tricky. I would definitely contact the ADA coordinator's office with any questions you have about that. They are very nice and very helpful over there, so I would reach out to them. So accessibility check. Once you have a survey completed and ready to go, you need to check your survey for accessibility. Now, Qualtrics will do this for you. When you get to the point where you're going to distribute your survey, Qualtrics is going to run an accessibility check on it. And we've already had a few people that have reached out to me and say, hey, I'm trying to put this survey into production, and it's saying I have accessibility issues. So you have to either fix your survey to make it accessible or file for an exemption with the ADA coordinator's office before you can put your survey into production. It has to be one of those two things. So if you have surveys out there in production right now, you need to go in and do this retroactively. Go back in and check your survey for accessibility. They haven't given me a time yet, but I would expect later this summer. I think July 1 was being kicked around as a date. they will turn off these inaccessible question types, which means if you have an active survey in production, those question types will become unavailable to survey respondents. So it is critical that you get in there and you check your survey for accessibility. If the question types you're using are inaccessible but vital to your research, you need to get on requesting that exemption as soon as possible. Get that run through there. They have told me at the coordinator's office that there's only a couple of instances where they're going to grant an exemption because they feel that there are workarounds to the inaccessible question types. One of the, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a future slide, but one of the criteria is if the study population that you're using is inherently excluded from folks with disabilities. Like if you're doing I think his example was, if you're doing a training protocol for bus drivers, obviously that's going to be kind of a self-select kind of thing. You're not going to have visually impaired folks taking that training module. So they grant exceptions in those kind of circumstances, but really the intent is that we're going to make everything accessible. So to do that, you go to the Tools menu, you click Survey Accessibility, and on the next slide it will show us what that looks like. So if you have inaccessible items on your survey, it will show you what is not accessible, and it will give you some recommended alternatives. So you have to go through and clear every single one of those red X's before it's going to let you go ahead and distribute that survey. And where you'll see question 4 and question 6 there just says not accessible. There are a couple of question types in Qualtrics that don't have an alternative, and that is heat map and the CAPTCHA verification, and we'll talk a little bit more about those as we go through each one. So the question types that we're talking about here that are inaccessible are slider, graphic slider, rank order, pick, group, and rank, matrix of the type bipolar or max diff, the heat map and hotspot, gap analysis, net promoter score, and the CAPTCHA verification. And the reason that many of these are inaccessible is because they're not, they're either reliant upon a graphic, obviously the graphic slider that the screen readers cannot read, or there's some other functionality that either a screen reader or the adaptive technology that folks use can't get to. Like obviously with the heat map, there's no way to describe that to a visually impaired person to have them interact with that heat map in the intended fashion. So here's a little chart of alternatives. We'll walk through a couple of these in a little more detail, but I just wanted to provide you a quick little lookup chart of instead of this, use that instead. So now we'll go ahead and walk through each one. So the slider type, you have two options really with slider type. You can make it a straight Likert scale type question. This one is best if you don't need a lot of granularity. If the difference between 10% and 20% is not, if you don't need those interim numbers, this might be a good option. The downside to the matrix Likert is then you start running into problems with mobile device accessibility. If you have a lot of choice types or a lot of choice options on your matrix, mobile devices can't render that. So this 0 to 100%, that's probably too many choices. And as you're designing in Qualtrics, you'll see a little red mobile phone icon next to your design that will tell you that you're running into mobile accessibility issues. So if you are wanting to design for mobile and or you need that granularity, the other option there, that is a constant sum question type. So you could put that in there and then they can enter a value between 0 and 100, and then you can actually validate so that the total equals 100. And that, I have been told, is a perfectly accessible question type. So the next one is a graphic slider. By itself, there really isn't anything that you can do with it. It's just straight ahead inaccessible. But you could make a multiple choice question that had some graphics in it. The criteria there is, can the graphic be described in text that imparts its meaning? So where we have the smiley faces, there's also text there that correlates directly with what that smiley face is trying to convey. Whereas the slider, there really isn't. There's no text that goes along with that gradient as the slider changes. And I should shout out here some of the graphics that I've taken and slides I've taken here from University of Colorado Boulder had a really good accessibility website. So I pulled some of these examples from their website, and I tried to give them due credit on these slides, but I got to do it vocally as well. So next up, rank order. Rank order has several different versions of it. The one that you're looking at there is as not accessible is drag and drop, and that's where you drag your mouse and physically drag those questions around in an order, which is inaccessible. So if you use rank order of text box type, that makes it accessible, and that is where they can just type in a number that ranks the corresponding option. And you'll see off to the right there, there's some optional validation that you can put on top of that, so that they have to rank every question, or each has to rank between this and that, or you can write your own custom validation. So I think that's actually a pretty good substitute for that question. I don't think that too many people will suffer by not being able to use drag and drop. Matrix bipolar we talked about. And I don't know that this is a good question type in the first place. I think it's got some usability and methodology issues aside from accessibility. So the option for that is just to make it a straight-ahead Likert matrix question. Again, keeping in mind mobile device issues. Pick, group, and rank. This again is kind of a difficult question type to use anyway, but the general idea is that you would have a list of items and you would have folks drag those items into various categories and then rank them. Pretty much any time you're asking folks to drag things around on a screen, that's an accessibility flag. So the way you get around that is on the next slide, where you again turn that into a matrix question and then use that matrix with some follow-up questions. So if the respondent chooses that punctuality detracted from their experience, then you could use a display or a skip logic type question to follow up on that and ask those following questions of you. Okay, you said punctuality, meeting length, and meeting location detracted from your experience. And then you could use one of those constant sum ranks to say, okay, which one detracted the most or something like that. Gap analysis, I don't know that this is a question type often used in research, but if for some reason you are, again, you can use a Likert and some follow-ups to mimic that same kind of gap analysis. It's not as clean on the back end with the data, but at the end of the day, you'll have the same result. So again, you would put your Likert questions, and then you would build some branching logic off of that to ask the appropriate follow-up questions that you needed to know for the gap analysis. So now we'll talk about some best practices. Notice that, I'll back up for a second, notice that I didn't talk about CAPTCHA verification because there is no substitute for that. I didn't talk about heat map for the same reason. And I didn't talk about Net Promoter Score. Net Promoter Score is very similar to a gap analysis. Again, I don't think Net Promoter Score is something that we typically see in research. That's really, it's more of a marketing thing where you're asking folks, how likely are you to recommend this product or this company to a colleague, and a bunch of follow-up questions, and there's some scoring built in underneath that. If you need to do that, by all means reach out to me and I can work with you on a workaround for that. So some general best practices to make your surveys accessible. Make sure the survey has a title. If you're using a progress bar, make sure you use the with text option. Verify that show export tags is checked, which is kind of an odd one. I walk through each one of these in future slides. That export tags doesn't mean what you think it means, which is odd. Change your default text for next and back to be text values. By default, there are those little arrowy things. Number every question and add descriptive alternative text to images. So changing the survey title, in addition to just naming your survey, which gives it a title, underneath the survey options function, there is a survey title box The default of that says online survey software, Qualtrics, yada, yada. And what that is that's what shows in the browser tab. And so a screen reader is going to read that as being the tab that they are on. So in order to avoid confusion, go ahead and mimic your survey title in that spot as well, so that the screen reader will pick that up as the title of the survey. If you're using that progress bar, there's options as you're there to have no progress bar, with text, without text, or with verbose text. With text, for the most part, is sufficient. If you have some kind of complicated thing, you might want verbose text, but I think with text is sufficient. That just tells you, you're 10% in of being done, basically. Show export tags, this is just kind of an odd thing, but it helps the survey respondents keep track of the order of the questions that they're in. So in your survey options, again, under survey experience, there's this little box for show question numbers. And for some reason, it says for participants try a progress bar instead. I have mixed feelings on a progress bar. If you have a really long survey or a survey with a lot of branching logic in it, I think sometimes the progress bar can be either discouraging or misleading. If you have a lot of branching logic, the progress bar is going to take all of that branching logic into account. So although there may be 500 options of paths they could go down, chances are they're only going to see about 25 of those questions. But the progress bar is going to act as though they have to do all 500. And so I think that's a little misleading for your participants. So as a general survey design note, I try to stay away from progress bars if possible. But so the show question numbers just helps the screen readers keep track of what's going on with your survey. There is a caveat there with survey logic that you need to add a caveat there if you're doing that, to make sure that the screen readers know that they may have accidentally skipped a question. Again, for any of this, if you're getting stuck, reach out to me and I'll work with you. The ADA coordinator's office is also more than happy to assist. So your next and back buttons, as I said before, they are graphics by default. They're those little arrows. If you go into that look and feel menu, there's an option to choose. Do you want it to be fixed text? You could actually even make it have a message that's stored in your library, which I don't know why you would do that. There's an option there for fixed text, and I use that, and then I just type in next, and I type in back, and that works. If you're using blocks, you can also set those next and back text values at the block level, and I would recommend you do that specifically for the final block, because a lot of times I think it's nice for the very last button of your last block to say submit, so folks know that we've reached the end and now it's time to submit the survey. So numbering the questions, this is also a little bit, Qualtrics does some strange things, but there is an option that you can rename your question numbers yourself. You can give them meaningful names, which from a survey design standpoint is a good thing to do, but from an accessibility standpoint, you really need to use the auto number questions with sequential numbering. So that again helps the screen reader keep track of, we're on question 1 or we're on section 1, question 1. So those are really the two that you want to use. Stay away from that internal ID numbering, because you could get into things there that the screen readers aren't going to be able to make sense of. So just go simple with your auto number questions. I would suggest that if you need to, on your back end, if you need to know what section a question came from, or you need to be a little more specific about the questions, put that in the name of your variable. So you name your variable Q1 underscore race or Q1 underscore ethnicity, something like that helps you identify where it was in the survey if you need that, because the screen readers won't see any of that back end stuff. They just read what's written into the survey. And then using alt text for images. Images in general are problematic when it comes to surveys. So if you use images, you have to have an alt text tag, and really the defining line again there is the image relevant to the meaning of the form? So if you're having them look at an image, you need to be very descriptive in what that image is. If it's just a decoration, then you can just use the default image alt null, and the screen readers will just skip over that as though it doesn't exist. So you really have to think about what's the function of this image that I have in here. Is it just a fancy logo or something that makes it look good, or is it really crucial to the content of the survey? So this is kind of an involved process to add these image tags. I've been told that Qualtrics is working on this. They have enough higher ed clientele that they've been made aware of these accessibility issues, and they are working on some better solutions. But for today, this is the workaround that we have. So although there is a questioned type of graphic where you can insert a graphic, in order to be able to provide that alt text, you can't use that. You have to use the text type question, and then use the rich content editor to add the graphic and add the associated text. So you go into the rich content editor, you'll see the green square there shows you add the graphic, then you pick your graphic from your library, and then on the next slide we'll have step 5, which is going into the source tag, and then you go into the source tag of that graphic and you type in what the source tag of that edit what that should show. And there's some guidelines on image tagging that I will include with the handouts. I've had to delve into quite a bit of standards, accessibility, and in talking with the ADA coordinator's office, there isn't even really a good solid set of standards across industries. There's recommendations from the W3 group. There's other recommendations. So I volunteered to work with them, and we're going to kind of come up with our own group of recommendations for these things, compiled out of a number of different sources. But I will give you the best material I have at the time, and we will keep moving forward with this. This is something that is going to evolve and change. My best 2 recommendations are reach out to the ADA coordinator's office and reach out to me if you're having accessibility issues. I think most of it is fairly straightforward, of just replacing some of those rank order type questions or involved bipolar matrix questions with a simple Likert. As with most things, keeping it simple usually keeps it best. So
Heather?
Yeah?
I was just going to say thank you very, very much. This has been wonderful information. I think having those best practices, like what were there, 6 or 7 of those, are extremely helpful. I mean, things like a title, or I mean, you sometimes don't think about maybe some of the simple things that make your survey so much more accessible. So does anybody have any questions for Heather? We're just a couple minutes over, even if we did get started late. I'm sure Heather would stay around for a couple minutes and answer any questions.
I have a
Absolutely.
quick question.
Sure, and who is this?
This is Rachel, Rachel Arocho.
Okay.
I just want to say first thank you for this. When you were talking about the questions being shut off, will that apply to surveys that were created by someone at a different university but that I have been shared with me and that I can interact with, or only those that were created on the OSU platform?
I believe it's only those that are created on the OSU platform.
Okay.
But I wouldn't be surprised if other universities find themselves in this same boat. They may be slower to the party than we are, because we were specifically named in a lawsuit. But I would it was us and UC Berkeley and a handful of others. I think they went after the highest visible targets, from what I understand. But this will definitely trickle down. So
Yeah.
Eventually this will get to them, and it wouldn't probably hurt to reach out to them and say, hey, this is something I've been made aware of. Why don't we work to resolve this now and get out ahead of it?
Definitely. Would you be okay with us sharing your PowerPoint with
Oh, absolutely.
them to kind of, cool, thank you. That'd be very helpful.
Yeah, and Rachel, we are recording this, and so as soon as we're done here, we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and then we'll send the recording as well as the slides, And you, of course, are welcome to share either one of those. And they will be put on the website as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so Kelsey, do you want to actually ask your question, or do you want Heather just to read it? So Heather, can you see Kelsey's question?
Yeah, I see her question. I think that's going to depend on your study population. If you know that they are all going to have iPads, then it's I would actually probably oh, you're providing the iPad. Have you asked in your consent document, have you asked anything about accessibility needs? That might be another thing to do, is add something in your consent document that, if you have accessibility needs.
Yeah, that's right. So if you know your population because you're providing them an iPad, I would hope that maybe you would know about those kind of issues as well. So perhaps your population doesn't have any kind of disabilities that would require readers or anything else, but
Right. And when you do your survey accessibility check, if you do get those inaccessible flags and you want to use those question types anyway, you'll need to go ahead and get an exemption from the ADA coordinator's office, because literally you cannot distribute the survey until either you have the exemption or you fix the survey question types, because what they're doing is they've turned off those question types for everyone, and they're only going to re-enable them on a case-by-case basis for people that have an exemption. And that's all done through the ADA coordinator's office, so we don't have any control over that at all.
Yeah. So Kelsey, it's going to be interesting for your population. You might have to have some tablets or
paper.
Yeah, paper. Yeah, so
paper,
you might
have somebody read the questions to them. I mean, you might have to go pretty old school.
Yeah, that's right. Good point. So Rebecca says she's typing. Let's see here. Is the subject going to do it on their own, or is there someone to assist? Becca, are you saying the subject do it on their own? I'm not sure what the it is. Filling out the survey? Oh, Kelsey said I will be assisting. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that may make a difference. I would definitely run, if you run your survey accessibility and you have issues, I would definitely contact Scott Listener at the ADA coordinator's office and just talk to him about what your plans are. In talking with him, it sounds like, at least for right now, the idea is, although we may not meet the standard, as long as we have checked in that we are aware that we need to meet the standard and we have a plan in place to meet the standard, that will get us through. So I would absolutely reach out to him and let him know that, this is what we're doing, this is what our plan is, and I wouldn't think they would have an issue with granting you an exemption if there's going to be somebody there that has the ability to read the question.
So Heather, I wanted to say one more thing. Just because we're talking about accessibility and we're doing a webinar. And so one of the things that we've been asked by the office, accessibility office, is not, I guess, asked. We've been told that our webinars are also probably not accessible to everyone. And so I'm going to put a little blurb in the chat window. And we have been told that when we send out registrations for our webinars, we are supposed to include this little sentence. And we can add to it if we want. But Heather, would you take just a minute or two and talk about what we are going to have to do with our webinars going forward?
Sure. So going forward, we are going to, as I build these PowerPoints, I'm going to essentially build a script that goes along with it, and then we will publish that script as a transcript of the webinar. as an interim step. Eventually, we hope to get to the point where we will have it closed captioned live, but we're not quite there yet. So the interim step is going to be I will write the script and talk about what's on the screen, and publish that transcript along with. And there's some interesting things that if you are faculty or staff and you have accessibility needs, and you're wanting to view this webinar, you can reach out to the ADA coordinator's office, and they can, especially in the case of students, the Student Disability Office provides captioning services for students that need it. It sounds to me like the criteria there is if it's required for a grade, which this webinar falls a little bit outside of that box, but it sounds like there is a little bit of wiggle room there in terms of...
Well, I just thought I would throw that out. Again, this is Kim. I thought I would throw that out just for those of you that might be wanting to do webinars, or just something that we're having to start to think about. So Heather, it looks like we have one maybe last question from Maria. So she says, so all the current surveys we use, do we need to reevaluate them for even if we do not encounter many of our population with disabilities?
Unfortunately, yes. I would highly recommend you go into each survey, do that accessibility check, and probably my best practice would be create a second version of the survey where you fix those accessibility issues, and then eventually pick a point that you say, okay, now this is the new link that we're going to send out to new subjects. And then if you are contacted by somebody that has an accessibility issue that got the previous link, you could direct them to the new link. That would be my recommended fix for that. But even though you have not at this point encountered anybody with disabilities, there's no prediction that won't happen in the future. And
that's right.
At some point, the ADA's office is going to be looking for compliance. They're going to go through Qualtrics and they're going to look for compliance. And the main thing that my main concern for you is that you have a survey in the field, and at some point that question type is just going to be turned off, and you're not going to know that that's affected somebody until you're looking at the data, which at that point is a problem.
All right. Well, thank you so much for attending. Hope you have a wonderful lunch, and we will get this survey, or I'm sorry, these slides and the recording out as soon as possible. All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.